Hi, this is Helen Gould, and hello Peterborough and world beyond. And this is my fifth personal live stream, now named Poetry Sandwich. Hope you enjoy this. So I'm going to start tonight with Left on the Shelf, which is a poem that I wrote a couple of years ago, 2018. Okay. A book of poems left unread, a bare ring finger left unwed. You wanted a lover and then you met him. Now you're in it, up to the brim. You thought he was nice at first, but now you realise he thinks you're just a cow to produce his kids and look after the house, cook his food and be his wench, the louse. A tinkle of laughter that can shatter a glass, a snort and a thump that can turn you on your arse. You're scared to leave and scared to stay as you try to live from day to day. A broken dream that's shattered in two, a dying wail with the ambulance due. The medics arrive, but you're no longer there. He's taken your life over, left nothing spare. It's hard to relate to the pain in your face. When you're terrified, he'll come back and find your place. Your hideout, your den, where you go with the kids when the three of you need to find somewhere safe. The pain is intense and you'll never feel worse, with nowhere to run and no words to curse. Your love for him's dying, your passion's all gone, and as the sun rises, its beams have shone into your memory, where there's a gap that began on the day when you met that chap. Thank you very much. Okay. So now we come to that time where I'm going to read a little bit of my fiction, and we're on now to the third chapter of The Invisible Dance. And on the last edition of this, Noreen has found out that Bai can make himself invisible, and works out that that's why he was sent to fetch her. But she still doesn't really know why. Bai, I can't see myself. He squeezed her fingers. It felt comforting, brotherly even. You won't be able to, but neither will our enemies. Oh, it sounds scary when you put it like that. What, our enemies? But they are. The Duran made an indirect threat against you that I would be harmed. And at the moment, I'm your only means of reaching your new job. Noreen shivered. Are you sure that was an illusion? It looked so real. I was terrified. Bai sighed. It was just an illusion, I'm sure. You said you couldn't see any blood trail when you came out of the shop. The street cleaners aren't that good or regular around here. So is our invisibility an illusion too? No, my people have the ability to vibrate our bodies at a speed just fast enough to make them disappear. I have to touch you to make you invisible too, so that you'll vibrate at the same speed as me. It's something to do with our skin colour, because red's the visible light colour with the longest wavelength. Noreen wished she'd known all this before deciding to take the job. Then she realised she probably wouldn't have taken it at all. She took a deep breath. What now? We can't use the car, but Sergei's arranging for it to be made safe. We have to go now, and we won't be able to talk to each other. I'll have to hold your hand. If we bump into anyone, they'll feel us, and the heat we give off, and know that we're there, just as they'd hear a slight noise if we talked. You mean they wouldn't hear what we were saying, just a noise? Yes. Because our bodies are vibrating, our speech sounds like a sort of drone. All the same, the Gerim Ha could locate us by even such a small noise. Then how can I hear what you're saying? Because you're touching me, we're vibrating at the same speed. If I let go, you'd stop vibrating and become visible again. He paused. A touch from one of us would feel like a brush against something soft, draperies or some such, unless we were running, in which case they'd never know what hit them. Let's go. Her hand was still grasped in his, and she had no choice but to follow him. Where are we going? Out of the city, through the blockade. You mentioned that before, but what is it? It's basically a wall which surrounds the city with a series of checkpoints in it. You can't get in or out under normal circumstances. The Perhuai lives here, and so do virtually all the other humans and off-worlders. The rest of the planet is divided up into geographical and climatic zones, the territories, in which each tribe has evolved to exploit. They'd reached the lift. I'll explain some more once we're through the blockade. Now's a good time to go because the locals will be resting. Not the humans. No, though the sun's very strong on our planet, but humans work all day and go to sleep before us. We have the little day, the morning, and the big day, the late afternoon and evening. The city will get busier again as the heat fades. Quiet now. They entered the lift. Everything seemed normal, yet not. For a start, it was strange not being able to see either Bai or her own body. The lift stopped. Noreen shrank back against Bai, expecting someone to get in. He gave her a little shove forwards when the door opened. The hotel seemed deserted. They passed down the corridor towards the foyer again. Sergei's wife sat reading a magazine. There was no sign of Sergei or anyone else. Urma, the key, Bai said. Noreen watched it appear as Bai laid it on the table. Urma just raised a hand and smiled. She seems quite comfortable with the idea of Bai's invisibility, Noreen realised. The foyer door was open and they passed through it. Out in the open, Noreen felt a sudden rush of emotion which she soon identified as hope. Sure, I can't talk or pick things up, but I'm on my way to a new job. Simon's far behind me on Earth, and my life looks as though it's changing quite radically. In a way, it was as limiting as it had been on Earth, never raising her head or letting her eyes make contact with her bosses, or being alone with him for fear of encouraging him. The limitations are different, that's all. For now, she couldn't talk and must suffer by his touch on her hand. But it wouldn't always be like that. Freedom lies somewhere on this world, I'm sure. She felt a tug on her wrist and realised Bai wanted her to go left. She let him walk slightly ahead, then realised the street was still fairly busy. A man approached them. A human, probably, if most of the native population were resting now. Bai pulled her closer to allow the man to pass. Noreen held her breath. She hardly dared let her heart beat. The man, an Oriental, drew level with them. Noreen's lungs protested at the lack of air and the heat. The man passed them. He looked straight ahead of him, as if unaware of their presence. Still, Noreen held her breath, aware that Bai was too. His grip on her wrist was cruel. When the man had moved on several paces, Bai exhaled lightly through his nose. Noreen copied him. Gradually, Bai relaxed his hold on her hand, but never let go of her completely. Now she understood. He can only communicate with me by touch. They began to move again. Noreen's boots allowed her to move almost silently, and she could still travel fast enough to keep up with Bai's strides. The only time they stopped was when someone came past them, and then, as before, everything came to a standstill, including breathing. Oh. Okay, so just a quick change of perspective for the rest of the chapter. Bai scanned the street ahead. Nothing moved. Something doesn't feel right. There was that same sense of disturbance in the city that he'd been aware of in the underground garage. He disliked the sensation of fear that prickled over his shoulders and upper back. The Gerim Ha must be abroad in the city. They usually kept out, if only because of the presence of the Père Huai's elite guards. But there's something else. On the opposite side of the street, a lone human male, perched on a wall, legs swinging. Too casual, Bai thought. His knowledge of human habits reminded him that although they didn't rest in the afternoon as his people and the Gerim Ha did, they still stayed out in the blistering heat. It makes sense for the Duran to send a human, but not to station him outside in the full solar glare. He pulled Nerine back against him and studied the man. He removed his broad-brimmed hat and fanned himself with it. Other than being in the wrong place at the wrong time, there was nothing unusual about him. Still, Bai was uneasy. Nerine made a small movement against him, as if she wanted to walk on, but he restrained her, frustrated at the inability to communicate fully with her. The human looked up and down the wide road, scanning the street, much as Bai was. Once his eyes roved over their exact position, and Bai and Nerine stiffened simultaneously. Bai wondered why a human would help a tribe that actively bottle his kind up in this city. It doesn't make sense, especially as I know just how expansionist humans can be. Almost casually, the human took a phone out of his breast pocket and pressed some buttons. After a few moments, he spoke into it. Alarm bells rang out of control in Bai's mind as the fine hairs on his neck prickled. He was sure this man had connections with the Gerim Ha. He laid his arm across Narine's midriff and pulled her back hard against him, half expecting her to struggle. She didn't. At least she must realise the seriousness of the situation. Bai scanned the street again. There was no sign of anyone else present. The sun beat down implacably. The use of a phone meant whoever he was speaking with was elsewhere. But where? Near or far? He watched the man's body language carefully. He was concentrating on his phone, which suggested his contact was out of view. But then he glanced up and away down the road ahead. Bai permitted himself a small sigh. He'd wanted to use the most direct route to the city perimeter, but perhaps he should take a less obvious direction. Whoever the man was speaking to must be lying in wait for them. If he was anything to do with the Gerim Ha. Bai scanned the street again. The nearest alleyway is perhaps 20 paces away. It would take us off this main thoroughfare so that we could work our way to the perimeter wall. If we can get over it without going near any checkpoints, so much the better. Obviously, my dyslexia's got the better of me tonight. Unusually for this time of day, a vehicle approached. It bore on its side a sketch of fruit. Oh, okay, I might need to look at that again. Oranges, melons, apples and juicy gland fruit. It might be bound for the human supermarket near Sergei's hotel. But why travel at this time of day? Fruits brought in from elsewhere on the continent to the spaceport by air, then distributed around the city by road. It was just the distraction they needed. Bai released Narine's waist and pulled her along with his other hand, aware of her now only as a weight on the end of his arm. When she realised his intention, she hurried to catch him up. Together, they dived down the alley as the rumbling vehicle passed between them and the human on the other side of the street. Bai wasn't used to having to hide whilst in the invisible state. It felt distinctly uncomfortable to him, and he resented it. But it was cooler in the alley. Trees blocked out the sunlight on one side, and white-painted buildings, looking attenuated from street level, performed the same function on the other. The alley curved round ahead of them, and Bai hurried them past the corner in case the humans had some other means of tracking them. Once around the corner, he stopped and surveyed their path. It would take them through a richer quarter of the city, past the Père palace, and on towards the wrong side of the perimeter. They'd need to turn off and work their way north again, but the alley offered shelter from the sun and a certain amount of safety, so a detour was acceptable. It's frustrating that I can't tell Noreen, though, or read her reactions. He reached into his breast pocket to ensure his own phone was off and the threat of global positioning surveying averted. The constellation of communications satellites had their own advantages and disadvantages. Then they set off along the alley. This is the ideal time of day to leave the hotel, he reflected. They followed the alley into an area where expensive human houses vied with spacious buildings bearing large plaques of local granite and slate and a park containing native plants. Probably hotels, Bai thought. Akakara has its tourist trade. That's another thing the Gerimha resent. They saw no one else, although from the elaborate gardens they passed, the tinkle and splash of water mingled with the shouts of children playing. Bai's frustration subsided. He felt the human woman relax beside him. To get her attention, he touched her arm with his free hand, then sketched an arrow along her forearm, holding it out in the direction he wanted to travel in. Ahead, surrounded by empty plazas, the attenuated towers of the Père palace branched to their left, mimicking the trees which surrounded them. The palace was carved out of a pink limestone from the Kwarwen Mountains. Bai had been in the buildings just once in his life and remembered the fossilised animals embedded in the rock. Some had fallen out of the stone or been worn away, leaving shaped holes which fascinated him. The animals ranged in size, from the size of seashells to larger creatures that walked on 4 feet. The rock was decoration enough for its own beauty. Even the perimeter walls were crafted with filigreed panels of it. He drew Noreen to look through at the grounds. One unit of the Père elite guard was drilling before the palace despite the heat. It consisted of Zardothi and human soldiers. Only metres away, a human from another unit stood motionless at the perimeter wall while his comrades patrolled between him and the next station. Bai looked back at the street. There was nobody around. "The Père palace," he whispered to Noreen. "Don't let a Zardothi see you. They can detect heat traces in the shadows." Thank you very much. Thought there was a bit more than that, but yeah. That's all of it. Yep, fine. Good. So, well, that was much shorter than I realised it was going to be. I thought it was going to be quite long. Oh, yeah, no, there is some more to go. I thought there was. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so we have got another 5 pages. Okay. Noreen squeezed his fingers back to show she'd understood. Bai led her past the palace. They crossed the plaza and turned down a side street which led away to their right. This'll get us back on track. Bai unconsciously quickened his steps, although he slowed when he realised Noreen was almost running to keep up with him, tall even as she was. He scanned about him and was gratified to see that there were no humans with phones. Hopefully they'd shaken off the pursuit. You'll have to excuse me, my teeth are just not working tonight. The blockade glinted steel grey ahead at last as the sun's glare waned. Beyond lay the prairie lands of the Gerimha and real danger. At least here in Langland City, no one could assume could accuse him of trespassing on another tribe's territory. Bai settled the rucksack more firmly on his back and tightened his grip on Noreen's arm, then led her down the street towards the metal wall. As they approached the corner, the watchtower came into view, a construction of glass and steel which mushroomed out of the blockade like a grotesque growth. Still gripping her hand, Bai pushed Noreen behind him, checking for patrols and Gerim Ha alike. If the Perhuai's men saw anything unusual, they'd try to intercept it, and interaction with them on any level could alert any watching enemy tribesmen to their presence. At the corner, the road ran parallel to the blockade, its smooth greyish surface, periodically punctuated at its top level by crenellations, split at the level of a 2-storey house to accommodate the passage of foot patrols along it. At street level, the area looked empty, but distorted though they were by his body's micro-vibrations, the distant sounds of marching feet reached his ears, echoing slightly in the space between the inner and outer skins of the upper wall. No chance of going over the wall. We'll have to go through the gates. The riskiest of strategies if there were others passing through at the same time, and there must be for them to pass without revealing their presence. "What happens now?" Noreen whispered in his ear. "We wait for a group of locals that we can tag onto to get through the gates." "Locals? You mean Gerim Ha?" "Perhaps. Every tribal group must pass through this gate to reach their territory, but the Gerim Ha are the ones most likely to use it." "But you wouldn't join a group of them to get through, would you?" "We might have to. It depends on the circumstances." "Wait." The streets were empty no longer. People were venturing out again. Though the big sun still glared down at them, its heat had waned. In the west, the little sun cast a glow from the horizon. A couple of humans had arrived at the gates and formed a queue. "They let parties through periodically," Bai whispered. "We could join this one, but we can't get too close to the other people in the party, so our best bet is to slip through while the guards are searching the others." "Okay." I wish I could read her body language. Bai felt the familiar frustration rise in him. "Let's wait until there are some more people. It'll give us a chance to check them out." 2. They'll take everyone aside in turn for processing through the weapons checks, which will give us our chance to get to the head of the queue. The minute the gates open, we're through and away. Noreen just okayed that, and she couldn't even tell from her whisper whether she was scared or not. He squeezed her fingers in case she was. "I won't pretend it's not going to be risky. If they find us, what happens?" Bai shrugged, then remembered she couldn't see it. "We'll be taken into custody. It's unlikely that anything serious would happen, but it will delay our arrival in Chi-Orm territory. Red tape and all that. But the Gerim Ha would know what we were up to at once. Then we become even more of a target, and they're breathing down our necks." "Okay," Noreen repeated. "I'm ready whenever you say." At the gate, the queue was growing. Passage time must be close. About 20 people, including humans and Gerim Ha, were waiting now. I'm recording, could you? I don't know, my family. I can't even see where I was now. Yeah. At the gate, the queue was growing. Passage time must be close. About 20 people, including humans and Gerim Ha, were waiting now. Thankfully, there were no Zardathi. They'd have spotted him at once. But the group even included a local produce truck, complete with its complement of farm workers. Bai scanned every figure before committing them to join the group. The humans didn't include the man with the hat they'd seen earlier, although there were a couple of others with phones raised to their ears or tucked into breast pockets or belt holders, or even just holding them as if poised to make calls or receive them. The Gerim Ha were mostly simple tribespeople conducting business in the city, Bai reasoned, although some could be connected to Kali and his followers. It was noticeable that most of them didn't carry phones. It might be better to wait and pass the blockade at night. But he was anxious to get ahead of their pursuers, and although it was more likely that they might be discovered through physical contact with another member of the crowd, his experience told him that if they could be first through the gates and keep moving, they had a good chance of pulling ahead. That would give Carly less time to lay a trap for them. "Come on," he whispered, and led Noreen towards the group. They'd just drawn level with the queue when another trio of Gerim Har detached themselves from a building across the street and drifted over towards them. Carly was not among them, unsurprisingly, since he'd been banned from the city by the Père Huay following an incident a few months previously, but there was something undefined about their appearance. I wondered if the Duran was close by anyway, altering the public perception of this group. He watched them very closely for a few minutes. One man carried something in the crook of his arm, but it was unclear what it was. Another raised his phone and spoke into it. The third looked around him, scanning just as Bai had. They must have been waiting for us. Every hair on Bai's neck prickled upright with the awareness of danger. The little day was starting in earnest now. People went back to work, bought supplies, children returned to school for activities. There's no going back, or we might be discovered anyway, Bai thought. All we can do is wait for the gates to open and avoid any physical contact, and run like the wind when the gates swing open. The inner gate swung open and guardsmen poured out. One of them shouted, "Form an orderly queue!" The waiting humanoids quickly got into line. One of the guardsmen marched along the queue, pointing left and right to alternate people. They began to filter off into two new queues. The group of three Gerim Har that Bai had been watching was split as the man with the phone was sent to the right, still talking. His companions watched him for seconds, then the one who looked as if he was carrying something turned and casually scanned the crowd, one hand shading his eyes. Bai didn't miss the sweep he made with the object either, but he still couldn't see what it was, and that worried him. Bai hung back, pulling Noreen against him warningly, as he instinctively tried to put a wall of other people between himself and the Gerim Har. There was just enough space for them to squeeze by. He pulled Noreen after him, around the back of the opposite queue from the tribesman with the object, flattening himself against the wall of the enclave behind the queue and past the weapons scanners. The guards were still processing the first person. Before the outer gate stood two more guards, clad head to foot in shiny silver suits with stun guns raised. The first man passed through the weapons scanners and approached the doors. They swung open, revealing the open prairie land beyond. Bai stepped forwards briskly, pulling Noreen after him. Behind them, a second man passed the weapons scan and walked towards the door until two guards crossed stun guns in front of him to stop him. "Let's go." Bai didn't wait for any more humanoids to come through after him. He and Noreen were through the door and onto the uneven ground before anyone could detect them, let alone stop them. Thank you very much. That is the real ending of that chapter. Okay. How are we doing for time? Okay, so we've just got a couple of minutes left, and I'm going to read to you my dog poo poem. So this is, well, anybody that knows me personally probably knows that I like to go walking every day. It's quite a good relaxation from writing, and I tend to use the time to think about my writing anyway, and sometimes, but I think about all sorts of things, and so sometimes I come back and I've solved a problem while I'm out. But of course there's that ever-present problem of people that don't pick up after themselves, or after their dogs rather. So I just got these few lines one day, and I thought, okay, I'm going to just, see where this leads me. So this is on the streets. Dog cack, scars the pavements on my mid-morning walk. I fear to put my feet down fair and square for such gross caulk. Kiddie scribblings would be far more preferable chalk, but when I meet my neighbour with his dog, we stop to talk. The conversation turns on this and that until we part. He's a lovely neighbour with a kind and gentle heart. I turn to watch him stroll away along the filthy street, in his hand a bag and scoop to keep things looking neat. On the box the other day, a scheme to ID owners at licensing by making their dogs DNA donors. Then, when the civic workers clean the poo from street and park, they can trace the owners of the dog that left its mark. This great idea will make our lives so much more hygienic. The paths will smell sweeter and will seem that much more scenic, especially when walkers like myself tread on those paviours. But there are some exceptions to the rule with all behaviours. At 80-odd, or maybe more, with her Labrador, old Bess, it's that lady from the bungalow, Mrs. Mobility Scooter. She can't walk around no more, except at home, I guess. But why are you determined she should face the prosecutor? And do we have the right to sneer or take her dog away? The dog walk is the only social highlight of her day, and Bess the one bright lamp left in her fast-dimming life, since husband Roger died and left behind this grieving wife. And what about the owners of guide dogs for the blind? They can't see to clean up, even if they're so inclined. So, should we really let it go or fine them for this crime? Oh, and Mr. Righteous, are you really so sublime? So, let there be some tolerance and some compassion too within the confines of the law on doggy poo. And please don't rush to label folks or apportion blame, 'cause one day you'll be old as well and blind or even lame. But equally, as with all things, let's see the other side. Dog poo is not hygienic. No one wants to slip or slide. So train your dog, dear listener, to go in your backyard. Then when it comes to walkies, the law won't be defied. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed that. I don't know if you would enjoy such a poem, but anyway, yes, an ever-present hazard. Okay, well, I will be back next month with another poetry sandwich, and hopefully you've enjoyed that. Cheerio. Oh, and this is going up on YouTube as well. See ya.